Okay. So I've chosen... nothing really changed, honestly. Nothing really changed. There was a lot of the same conversations. But I chose Andre this time and I managed to... Because I went back to when Heath was with Andre. And chose to be, yes, I will ally with you or whatever. That made, like, the trust or whatever, the rep, go up more. And now it's gone up even more. So now I think some Golgotha are helping. Oh no, that simply won't do. As I rounded the corner, a group of Golgotha stepped from the shadows. Zhang stood at the forefront wearing a wide, malicious grin. Let loose, my friends. I'm not saying whatever he just said. The next second, everything from ninja stars to throwing axes whirled past my head. Most of the projectiles weren't aimed to kill, but it was more than enough to send my pursuers fleeing, screaming in panic. A few Golgotha chased after them, using up the rest of their bizarre weaponry before pulling out loaded guns. I stared at the disappearing shapes of my attackers, who looked like the Mavar from the club. A fantastic performance tonight, Valkii. Zhang beamed at me proudly, offering some enthusiastic applause. I think a standing ovation from the clubgoers was well deserved, but I suppose the rest of your audience wasn't quite so appreciative. At least you're a man of culture, Zhang. That's awfully kind of you, and rather spot on if I do say so myself. Oh well, as delightful as it'd be to linger around for the fun, I think we'd better get back to the graveyard, don't you? Yeah, I guess. Delightful place to be. Actually, if you'll give me a second. He didn't smell human. I wondered if they'd somehow stolen the car or if vampire cabbies were a normal thing in LA. Thanks to his fast driving, we pulled up at the cemetery before long. As soon as we stepped past the towering gates, I noticed a group of vampires in the distance crowded near the mausoleum. It felt incredibly strange to see so many people here at once. Most of the city's Golgotha had apparently showed up, and there was plenty of new faces I'd never seen before. And here's Heath. Heath was standing with them. As soon as our eyes met, his lips curled in a warm, hugely relieved smile, and he waved at me delightedly. I couldn't talk to him yet, though. There was still someone I had to see. Welcome to the both of you. When I stopped in front of the mausoleum with Zhang, Andre turned to study us. You have done a most admirable work, Valkii. It would seem the Mavar and Ascari have retreated to their respective fortresses for now, allowing us to solidify our plans. My speeches usually do drive people away. Andre gave me a thin, slightly puzzled smile, as if he didn't really grasp my humour. However, my assistants have informed me that both houses intend to wage an attack tomorrow night, despite their uncertain ground. The Ascari are quite confident they can overwhelm the Mavar, then lay siege to us, while the Mavar are desperate enough to make a final attack before they lose their foothold. His golden eyes drifted past me for a moment, gazing towards the city lights that glittered in the distance. I could tell a plan had already formulated itself in his head. All those gathered are in agreement. We must involve ourselves tomorrow. We must involve ourselves in tomorrow's conflict to ensure that. I'm out of breath because I had to go and get in the shopping. We must involve ourselves in tomorrow's conflict to ensure our advantage is not lost. Andre motioned towards the other Golgotha, who'd been watching us attentively this whole time. They stayed silent as if they were attending a mass, but I saw a few nods when Andre mentioned their decision. There is but one aspect not finalized, our method of attack. We have settled on two options, both equally viable. Indeed, the sole deciding factor could be one's sense of honor in combat. We may construct an ambush, cloaking our presences for a short while, or alternatively wait for Mavar and Ascari to weaken each other before joining the fray. I don't know. We should lay an ambush. Then I shall arrange one. The Ascari are more powerful, therefore it would be wise to strike them first. A fine choice, I'm sure it'll go over marvelously. Zhang offered a supportive snap of his fingers, seeming thrilled about the idea. I'll be staying up tonight with a few daring assistants, I think. We'll funnel some unusual images into our enemies' dreams, plant a few distractions for tomorrow. You do you, Zhang. And I most certainly will, Valkii, thank you. With a cackle, he tipped his hat at me mischievously. With patience and planning, we may well emerge as tomorrow's victors. Andre's gaze, which never left my face while Zhang spoke, grew a little sharper. However, there is one remaining concern. Not all of the city's vampires will be participants in this conflict. Of course, some of the Mavar and Askari will undoubtedly agree to join our new government after the turning tides of power become clear, but there will be many others remaining who wish to see our downfall, both yours and my own. He paused for a moment, letting the unpleasant implication of his words sink in. We may engage dissenters in combat or drive them out, as well as charging their leaders with their respective war crimes. There's also the option of keeping the remaining vampires under surveillance to prevent future violent activity. So it's basically the same options we get in the other one. What is your opinion on this matter? Just get them all out. Drive them out. Andre nodded, tilting his head thoughtfully. An interesting choice. I will strongly consider such a course of action. Then there is nothing more to discuss for tonight. All that remains is tomorrow's denouncement. His attention flicked from me back to the group of Golgotha and motioned with one hand around the graveyard. Those of you not guarding the cemetery are free to repose wherever you see fit. There is plenty of space for all within the mausoleums. The less claustrophobic among you may even find the lodgings to be pleasantly agreeable. When Andre finished speaking, soft murmurs filled the night air, and the gathered vampires quickly started to disperse. Some of them shuffled inside the mausoleum, while others roamed among the trees and graves, disappearing into the darkness. Andre and Zhang wandered off together down the path, leaving me by myself. Valkii. Just as I turned around, though, Heath came rushing up towards me. Valkii, I knew you'd be all right, but After a brief moment, he suddenly stepped closer, his palms moving to cup my cheeks. Before I knew it, his face was right in front of mine, about to close the distance between us. His cool lips passionately sealed against my own, pouring out all the relief he couldn't put into words. I pressed back into his embrace, returning all of Heath's long, tender kisses. As my fingers drifted through his feathery hair, I could feel him trembling slightly, his fingers clutching my jacket like he never wanted to let go. But after a long few moments, he reluctantly pulled back, just enough to smile gently at me before his gaze slowly fell to his feet. I'm so sorry, Valkii. I wasn't able to slip away from Charisse in time, or else I would have been there at the club. And I wanted to be there so badly. I'm just glad you're okay. I wasn't sure if I'd make it out alive. Please don't say that. I'm going to feel even worse for not being there to protect you. Heath winced, shaking his head with a faintly uncomfortable smile. But someone else told me what you said at the club, the way you faced everyone so bravely. You really supported Andre in the end, and I'm so proud of you. And the more I think about the future, the more I realize. You mean more to me than anything, much more than myself. This is another one of those things where I'm like, I don't know. Let's feel out the answers. You can't think like that, Heath. Put yourself first. Can't go against my feelings or pretend I wouldn't do anything for the person who's done everything for me. More than anything, I just want to make you happy, and once this is over, Valkii, we'll be happy, I promise. Placing a gentle hand on my shoulder, Heath lifted his head towards the moon, where the pale rays made his skin seem nearly translucent. I think we should find a place to rest before the sun comes up, don't you? After all, tomorrow's going to be a long, long night. But you'll make it through, like you always do. What about you? What about you? He loves me. He loves me not. He loves me. He loves me not. The squeaky whisper of a Golgotha beside me tickled my ear. She was sitting against the wall with the rest of us, counting through her rifle magazine with one finger. I'm sure he loves you. He. Oh, he does. The girl winked at me as if we were sharing some kind of secret code. I was crowded in a small nook off the road with about a quarter of the attacking group. The rest was stationed further down. The Mavar hideout was down the alley nearby, within hearing distance. We'd been lying in wait for some time, waiting for the Askari to show up somewhere. Our presences were cloaked, hidden by the shell of some Golgotha power I didn't really understand. It wouldn't last very long, but long enough for us to catch our opponents off guard, supposedly. Earlier that evening, Andre had assigned me to the group. He seemed confident that I should be involved and made it clear that there wasn't any room for argument. In the end, I decided to... Let's... fight this time. I wanted to be a part of the fray myself, not stick to the sidelines. Andre offered me several weapons, so I chose to fight. Up close and personal with melee, why not? I went with a long pair of knives, light and sharp. It was enough to defend myself and help disable the enemy, but I hadn't been in a real fight against other vampires yet. I'd just have to trust my instincts would match theirs. Most of the Golgotha had left the graveyard, but a few stayed behind just in case the Mavara Riscari planned a surprise attack. Heath was one of them. He hated the idea of letting me go alone, but Andre persuaded him to stay. All three of us probably knew he didn't belong in a fight, if that night at Saturnalia was any indication. As we waited together in the darkness, no one seemed inclined to say anything. Besides the girl next to me, a few people whispered now and then, but most others seemed weighed down by anticipation. Only the occasional sound of passing traffic broke the silence. Oh? Zhang abruptly lifted his head. The next moment I heard a car engine approaching, but instead of passing by, its engine abruptly turned off. Zhang and I exchanged glances. I felt something different in the air nearby, but it was hard to place what or where it was. They must have been cloaking their presences too. Motioning for us to follow, Zhang slipped out of our hidden spot. I followed along with the other Golgotha, bracing myself for whatever was around the corner. But none of us were ready for the Mavara Riscari to charge at us head-on. Within seconds, a cataclysmic... This is like shit we've seen before. Okay. Letting my instincts take over, I charged into the clash of bodies. Before I knew it, I was slashing out with my knives, carving into the nearest enemy. A blood-curdling scream rang in my ears. I dove forward to slash again. And again. And again. I felt my body moving faster than my mind, dodging and lunging on pure reflex. Bullets grazed my sides, missing my skin by less than a hair. Everywhere I turned, figures lunged at me with claws and knives, and each time I returned their attacks. Each time I splattered their acidic blood against the ground. Something slashed into my side, sending a bolt of pain through me, but I gritted my teeth and kept going. I had to keep going. The air blended into a cacophony of laughter, roars, and screams. Is this another one I can skip? Okay, thank you, everyone. At that moment, a delighted voice rang out over the chaos, sing-song and manic. It sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. Yeah, this time I accepted his deal, by the way. Until a skeletal figure blurred across my vision, followed by splatters of blood. It was Lazarus keeping his promise to protect me. Grabbing 2 guns from the ground, he started to fire haphazardly. Thank you! The vampires around him tried to dart away, but his bullets always found them. They collapsed one after another, screaming, tripping over themselves. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I also got his backstory. I think he was like an idol. I kind of skimmed through it because I really wanted to get to the point where I wanted to start recording again. His eyes were huge, bloodshot, full of obscene delight. Somehow he looked cruelly innocent, like a child crushing ants. Help! No. No matter how much they cried for mercy, his shots kept drilling into their skulls. Lazarus didn't seem to hear them even as he grabbed fresh guns from their corpses. For a moment I had the bizarre sense that he wasn't here. He was stuck somewhere deep inside his own head. But wherever he was, I couldn't see it, and I had a feeling I wasn't supposed to. I was yanked back into the fight, carnage still rampaging around me in full force. Each time I blinked, I saw a different body fall. This is more stuff. Okay. There were more Golgotha still alive, some groaning and shuddering on the ground, others helping tend to the fallen. The Mavara Riscari had fled, leaving only their dead behind. If you gave me 1,000,000 years to ponder, I would never have guessed that true romance and Detroit would ever go together. A woman's soft, sultry voice echoed through the bedroom. I almost had the script memorized by now, as often as I'd heard these lines. But no matter how many times we sat here, watching the opening of true romance flash across the screen, he's always seemed enraptured by it. Oh, he's so pretty. What the fuck? The light from the TV screen flickered over his pale features, reflecting in his eyes like a second square pupil. He hadn't noticed that I'd risen to my feet, or even that the doorbell had rang a few seconds ago. Heath? Images of a dim, grungy bar faded onto the TV. His eyes widened a little more, taking in the familiar scene with as much delight as if he'd never watched it before. Valkii. Finally, Heath spoke my name, but his eyes didn't move from the screen. Don't leave, the opening is the best part. When they meet and laugh and instantly fall in love. You can't enjoy the rest of the movie if you miss it. I'd gotten used to this by now. We'd moved in together a few weeks ago, and I had quickly learned Heath's habits, the few that he had anyway. He was quiet, always attentive to my needs, clinging to my side whenever I was home. I could tell how desperately he wanted to please me, and how terrified he was of ever making me angry. In all this time, Heath never argued with me once. It seemed strange, but whenever I asked him about it, he replied that arguing was never worth it, when all he wanted was to make me happy. But there were a few things he stuck to. Unless someone forced him, Heath almost never went outside. Whenever he did, he seemed to fall into a depression that lasted several nights, and he only recovered once he'd hidden away for a time. And there was only one thing he ever really wanted to do with me, even if I tried to coax him into other activities or pastimes. Sit here and watch movies together. Always the same type of movie too. Dramatic, romantic, and unrealistic. He'd stare at the TV, completely hypnotized, reluctant to say a single word until the movie was over. Whenever I walked in on him alone, I'd almost always find him just like this. Completely lost in the screen. Somehow, several months had already flown by. After the fight, Andre and I began sorting out the coven, following up on our plans. We drove out the rebel Mavar and Ascari, who fled elsewhere with their leaders. Most of the neutral vampires were allowed to stay, although Golgotha kept a watchful eye on them at all times. So far, there hadn't been any sign of a planned coup, though it seemed uncertain how long peace could last. And Lazarus, after the climactic fight, he didn't try to contact me, and no one ever mentioned his name. Without a trace of his presence left behind, it was almost like he'd vanished altogether, or met his fate trying to take revenge on Andre. As time went by, Andre honored his word, keeping me as his high-ranking assistant for as long as I desired. Our relationship never really grew any closer, like he purposefully kept a distance from me, but he always seemed to listen to my opinions carefully. With LA firmly under Andre's control, all of our resources were put towards furthering his plan. Nobody knew how long it would take before we could enact it. Years, decades, maybe even centuries more. But hopes stayed high. Everyone clung to the idea of a world where we didn't have to hide in the dark, always pretending like we didn't exist. It was that dream, however distant, that kept the coven motivated and together. A dream Andre always encouraged to the fullest. In my mind, though, I had to wonder if the uncertain timeline for Andre's future was what dragged Heath down. Back at the beginning, he always talked about what he'd do when we didn't need to hide anymore, and he could finally reclaim his old life. But over time, Heath seemed to bring up those distant dreams less and less, until he barely mentioned them at all. And as for David, because I wasn't able to visit the hotel again for weeks, I wasn't sure about his fate, and for weeks there was no sign of him, but soon I learned that he hadn't been killed. Instead, someone told me they saw him with another vampire, a man who'd apparently taken him in as a pet. After that, we never encountered each other again. Well, that's fine. Valkii. Heath's soft voice mingled with the low hum from the TV, almost drowned out by it. Don't bother answering the door. Sit back here with me, please. He reached one hand up towards me, fingers pleadingly outstretched. Alright, I'll stay here with you. Thank you. As I settled down beside him, Heath curled an arm snugly around my waist, leaning against me. He felt delicate and thin in my arms, like a tiny animal that needed me to protect him. We fell back into silence and the movie played on. Curious, I glanced down at Heath, wondering if the earlier interruption had pulled him from his trance at all. But his expression had gone almost completely blank again. Turned into only a reflection of the brightly flickering screen. It's sad, but like, I don't know how to fix him. I don't know if you can fix him. Like the only the thing he apparently, which makes sense, because he kind of missed being a human. He didn't like hiding. Like that was kind of obvious. But yeah, if that kept not happening, and it was going to take a long time. Oh, I feel it's depressing. Right, let's have a look at our extras, because I do... okay, so we got all the common root stuff, and we got most of the Heath stuff, but there's something missing here. Look, he's drawn so beautifully, help! He's drawn so beautifully, I can't. I'm going to... I guess I'm going to see, because there's like another ending. Let's see, endings. Heath, and blank oblivion comes, coma, and then this one unlocked. So we can do this one now, apparently. So I'm gonna try to do this one now. But I guess I will unpause if I get there, and if there's enough to see. I don't know, I'll explain things, I guess, when I get there.